Hello and welcome. This is Paul Sims speaking to you from iPharma HQ in London. Well done for being here on time. Thank you so much. I can see that there's a lot of you signed in already. Just hold on for 60 more seconds. We're going to just wait to start, as I can see a lot of people are still joining, and I don't want them to miss the introduction. So don't go anywhere. Back with you in just 1 minute. Hello, everybody. This is Paul Sims once again from eyeforpharma in London. Really pleased that you are all with us today. Thank you for signing in, being on time. Today, we're going to be talking about the subject that you can hopefully see right in front of your screens right now. It's called Flex It Up. The reason we've decided to focus on this webinar is because we want to find out how we can introduce more agility and more dynamism into our companies. And when I say into our companies, I'm talking across sales, marketing, and medical. So that is going to be what we're going to be talking about today. I suppose the motivation for this is really because responding more quickly to market changes, responding more quickly to the real-world insights that we're generating, is something that companies are increasingly expected to do, and the reason for that, of course, is customer expectations. And of course, that means quickly and competently resourcing teams, and it means being able to test new campaigns, new solutions, iterate more frequently, and obviously drive our resourcing accordingly. So flexibility, dynamism, they've become watchwords for us, and tomorrow's winners are likely to be the companies that really allow us to do that. So we're going to be ensuring that rigidity and complexity are things that we avoid. So if you look in front of your screen now, you'll see that I'm joined by some friendly faces. On the top left, first is Julian. We're privileged to have Julian on board for two reasons, really. Firstly, Ashfield, his organization, is a significant organization. It works across numerous campaigns, numerous companies, multiple agencies, and is very well qualified to talk about this topic. The second reason is because Ashfield have actually been a terrific partner in making today's session happen. Indeed, I would say that the work that the company has been doing recently has been the inspiration behind putting on today's event. And I think Julian will say a few words about some of the work that he's been doing, and you'll see a bit more of that in just a moment. Julian himself joined the industry in 1982 working at Glaxo. He's worked in a variety of sales and marketing roles, been involved in several successful launches and 2 company mergers. He was with Innovex in 1995, which then became Quintiles, of course, in a biz dev role. And he's actually left to start his own contract sales business. You might remember Interfocus, which later was sold to United Drug, and then has been with Ashfield as a member of his board of directors for some years now. So really fantastic that you could join us, Julian. Thank you so much. Directly under Julian, we have Christina. Christina describes herself as a technology optimist by heart, who firmly believes that the transformation that we are facing in healthcare will be on an unprecedented scale. And of course, it's going to start with some of the work that we're talking about today. Christina has also been a great friend of mine and iPharma's over the last year or two, and has joined us on stage on more than one occasion, and really pleased that she's taking such an active influence in developing our industry and the way in which we progress. She's a great fan of disruptive technologies and how increasing empowerment will change the game. Matthias, top right. Matthias joins us from McKinsey. He's an associate partner there. And of course, you'll all be familiar with McKinsey. Matthias himself has experience in pharma and medical device industries, particularly in go-to-market strategies, product launch and growth strategy, as well as commercial analytics. Today, though, he's also going to kindly draw on some of his firm's expertise in industries beyond life sciences. So very excited to hear about some of those things that Matthias will furnish us with later. Last but certainly not least is Paul. So Paul is a healthcare marketing, communications, and digital professional. He's got a lot of experience in strategic development and tactical delivery of value, which is what we're all about these days, isn't it? He's an expert in multi-channel strategy, in creatively and compliantly integrating both online and offline channels. His previous position, until not so long ago, was the Director of Global Commercial Strategy at GSK, but he's also spent a number of years at Shearing Plough, obviously before it was bought, at AstraZeneca, and even has consumer marketing experience working at Boots. So we have, I think, a very strong panel today, and I'm really looking forward to some of the insights that we're going to get. Of course, it's not just about these four, it's about you as well. And so what I would really like for everybody to do over the course of the next few minutes is to ask something themselves. So if you see the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen, perhaps you can write a little hello in there so I know that no one's fallen asleep already. And if you can, just once you've familiarized yourself with that box, if you can keep using it throughout the webinar, keep active, then that would be fantastic. It's the only way to make sure that, of course, we deliver on exactly what you guys want. Yes, I'm getting lots of hellos now in, so thank you very much, including some interesting messages of personal greeting. Thank you very much to those of you who sent those. And yes, today's session will be recorded, so don't worry about that. Don't worry about taking notes, etc. We will be able to share it with your colleagues and be able to listen again. So just enjoy and be active on the questions panel if you can. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Julian, who's going to show us a few slides. So Julian, are you there?
Yep.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Thank you, Paul.
I'll move on to your,
can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul, and good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Delighted to be participating in this webinar, and really looking forward to the interaction and the questions that come from it. One of the themes that we've been talking about in preparing for this webinar is all around organizational change and how we as organizations change our behavior to become more flexible, agile, and responsive to a market which is changing at a real pace. And often, for change to take place, you either need a catalyst or an event or a series of events which will provoke that change. And what I've tried to capture on this first slide is just some of the catalysts or trends that we see are significantly provoking change within the industry and within the marketplace. And I'll just explain a little bit on each one without going too much depth. But in terms of R&D productivity, this is as judged by the relative return per dollar of R&D spend. And what we've seen over time is that this ratio has declined. So the relative returns from the R&D spend has declined over a considerable period of time. And as a consequence, companies have streamlined their portfolios. And what we're seeing increasingly are companies looking to become much more targeted and a lot more efficient with their SG&A spend, with a much greater focus on what return they're getting per dollar of promotional spend. The pricing and affordability issue is really across all markets, and what we're seeing is a number of new barriers to entry emerging, a lot more market access challenges being presented, and this is meaning that companies are having to be a lot more agile, a lot more flexible, a lot more responsive to market changes. So, for example, in some markets where formularies can change very quickly, in some cases from week to week or month to month, companies need to be very quick and agile in order to protect their sales and the profitability of their brands in those particular regions. In terms of the death or not of the sales force, what we've seen is that physician access and healthcare practitioner access continues to decline. In fact, some units and even some regions and some countries are completely shutting down. I know in China, for example, some hospitals are no-go zones. Some areas in the US are very, very difficult access. And even in the UK, a high proportion of doctors are now difficult to see. So the other point here is that even when we do get to see physicians, the time that we're spending with them is declining. So the challenge here is it's really starting to challenge established marketing paradigms, and it's forcing companies to really think differently about A, how to engage with physicians, B, how to create value in that interaction, and C, how to continue that dialogue and continue to create value in front of those customers. And out of all of that, we've seen this digital disruption. The digital channels are rapidly becoming an important adjunct and in some cases a substitute for traditional sales methods. And the uptake of various digital channels is really gaining traction with physicians and HCPs, particularly those who have qualified in the last decade. And if you look in markets like Japan, with M3 and China with WeChat and various other markets, we're seeing a very strong uptake of these alternative channels. The growth of specialty care, of course, is really where it's at. It's a huge focus on oncology, rheumatology, and immunology. But what's happened, or what we're seeing, is that these spaces are really becoming increasingly crowded. And with the addition of biosimilars coming down the line, this means that companies are really having to be agile. They're having to respond quickly. They're having to be flexible, and increasingly looking at new models to maintain their competitive advantage as more and more companies launch products. The interesting point on the orphan is that orphan drugs will probably account for up to 20% of healthcare spend within the next 5 to 10 years. What we're seeing here is that the challenge here is all about identifying the patient and getting them into the system. And companies with orphan products, we're seeing are real engines for innovation. And we're seeing real creativity and real different ways of engaging, and a great deal of agility and flexibility in terms of their marketing practices. So some interesting trends coming out of the orphan sector. We're also seeing continued consolidation in the marketplace. We see further anticipated M&A. And the interesting thing is that the likely top order of pharma in the next 10 years will probably include some names that currently don't feature. For example, today we see Gilead right up there, and 10 years ago, perhaps we didn't. And then the final trend that we're discussing a lot is all around the power of the patient, and the importance of the role that the patient has in the prescription. And what we see is patients are really better informed than they ever have been before, and they will increasingly play an important part in the choice of medicines. And what we're seeing is increasingly companies spending a lot more in the engagement with patients and the retention of patients. So this isn't the whole list. These are certain trends that we talk a lot about, and these are certainly things that people are addressing in a big way. If we could have the next slide, Paul. So what does this mean? Well, what we're seeing is that the payer and HCP engagement really needs to move on in terms of how we engage with these particular customers. They are becoming more sophisticated. The needs of these customers have changed, evolved. The requirement for data is becoming more prominent. So what we're seeing is a big move from what was historically a very transactional relationship with these customers to a much more multi-dimensional and a much more strategic engagement. And if I can move you to the next slide, Paul. So where we're seeing people channeling a lot of efforts is in a very much a multi-channel engagement with both personal and non-personal engagement with physicians. We've seen the emergence of quite a number of new channels. We're seeing some real innovation and some real progress in some of these areas. The digital engagement in particular is gaining real traction, and some of the sophistication that we see in that whole area is very interesting. But also some of the physical channels have evolved and developed, and the number of new roles that are coming in all of the time is very interesting and bringing a very different way of engaging with customers. One of the critical things that we see in this whole engagement is the importance of data and analytics. Being able to harness the various data sources, make sense of them, and increasingly to be able to use that data and analytics to better inform which channels are the most appropriate for different physicians and which channels are driving the best type of engagement and the best return on investment is where we're seeing a lot of people investing a lot of dollars to try and make sense of channel mix and optimization. So from our perspective, the most agile players are the ones that have really embraced these new models and these channels. They're significantly investing in different channels and different mixes, and they are experimenting as they go along. And the final point that I'd make here is that it's important to distinguish between embedded activities of this nature, multi-channel engagement, and actually doing. There are an awful lot of companies out there doing, so they are doing different channels, but there are very few where this type of strategic engagement is really embedded in the way that they do things and in the culture of the organization. So for example, I was with a customer just recently who actually have a very highly skilled internal digital expert team, but the marketing teams come to them at a very late stage in their planning process, and therefore, rather than it being embedded, it's something that they still feel that they need to do. So those companies that I think are winning have really embraced this and are really challenging the old way of doing things and moving into the new world. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Julian, and really appreciate some of the thoughts you've got there. I think that it might be a nice idea for us as an audience to reflect on some of the things that you were saying, Julian, in your very first slide where you talked about some of the issues. And by the way, thank you for those of you who are asking questions. I can see them rolling in, and I will come to them in just a moment. But before we do that, let's have the audience take part in a poll question. So if you look at your screen, why has flexibility and agility become a critical component to success for pharma companies? Now, Julian's given 8 different reasons. I'm going to be far meaner than he is and make you choose only one of the items on this list, which I realize is not very kind, but I'm interested to know what, in your opinion, is the most important of these things. So is it that the classic pharma way of doing things has simply become too costly? The traditional model isn't working anymore. Is it because of the opportunity that data enables us to have, test hypotheses, adapt quickly? Is it driven by customers and their expectation? They are experiencing in all their other walks of life a more tailored experience and a more rapidly adapting experience, and we have to do the same. Is it our natural evolution? Is it, you could say this is similar to the last option, but I'm talking on a grander scale here, longer term scale. Is it the natural evolution of how we need to go as an industry and markets in order to stay relevant? And finally, is it because of the fact that we need to partner to respond to, or even to supplant some of the tech players who, of course, have come from a more flexible and agile background? GAFA, if you're not aware, stands for Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon. So I can see that roughly half of you have already voted. I'm going to hold that open for 3 more seconds. Let's get those final votes in. 3, 2, 1. Okay. I'm actually quite surprised by this result. The winner is not what I expected. It is because of the natural evolution. That's getting 2/5 of you there. And there's obviously a few answers on each of these. But the one I thought would be highest would be either the second or the third here, because data enables us the opportunity that data provides, and of course, customer expectations. The idea of working and keeping up with our tech players is less of a concern. So I'm going to open up the comments to all of our panel to see if they've got any comments on here, and then I'll come to some audience questions. So have any panelists got anything they want to say about this so far? Silence. Come on, everybody. Wake up.
We're awake. So thanks for that. It's a great intro question, Paul. Of course, it's a high-level question, but I think I agree with you that the results are a bit surprising, because what it tells me in a way, and maybe I'm overinterpreting, is that there's really not a sense of a burning platform. So it's more adapting to how the market will evolve over time, more than there's a sort of a fundamental need. And I think that's actually worth discussing. So is there a fundamental need for change, or is it more, that we go with the flow?
Okay, interesting. I'll put the results back up as well so you can see where we are. Anyone else?
Hi, it's Paul here. Christina, I'd agree with you, and I'm surprised. There's a certain amount of looking inwards there. I think, yes, we're looking a bit outside to what our customers expect. I expected that to be much higher, as Paul mentioned in his intro. And Julian, our customers' expectations about what they get from other organizations mean that we have to, in my view, change the way we do things in pharma. But I'm also very surprised at the low response to what's happening with new entrants coming into the market, what Google is doing, what Amazon is doing, Toolpack and so on. So yeah, I'm surprised with the spread of those answers.
A couple of audience comments, people saying that customers drive everything. So it's a bit of a difficult one to choose. I totally appreciate that, but I didn't say I was being nice. So anyway, sorry, Matthias, I think you were saying something.
Yeah, I think it's probably a matter of what time horizon you look at. I guess like the Google, Amazon, Facebooks, they are on the radar, I would say, for people who think very strategically, and they can be a huge disruptor in the market. If you are now managing like a country affiliate, if you are concerned about hitting your next sales target, I don't think that they are top of mind for you. So I think would be interesting to see how this breakdown would look like by the role of the people on this webinar. But that's, I think, would explain a little bit why the last option got so few respondents.
Well, please do feel free to answer that question from Matthias directly, and I'll read out some of the responses. The other thing that I wanted to do just at the start of this conversation is to ask a second question. Again, it just helps us see where we all are in the room. And this is a question which sort of is designed to gauge how things actually are on the ground right now for you. If you had a good new idea for use in a marketing campaign, how long on average would it take you or your company to actually grant approval for that idea? And I realize that is, I've not really defined what the idea is in this case, and I've not defined what the marketing campaign is in this case. So you're going to have to average this out a little bit and give the answer that you feel is most appropriate. But I'm very interested to see Obviously, we're only interested in what pharma companies say here. If you work for another company, then talk about your clients rather than yourself, please. So very interested to hear where people currently are. So about 40% of you voted so far. Another 3 seconds. I'll hold it open to get most of your answers in, I hope. 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everybody. Let's have a quick look at the responses, and thank you to everybody that voted. Right, we have a bit of a normal distribution on this one, don't we? It's clearly heavily weighted towards the 1 to 9 month area, because that's how long it has taken for most people. And perhaps pleasantly, we can hear that it's taking few of us longer than it does to have a baby, 9 months. So that's good news. But also very few people on the instant and typically less than a month option there. So we're not agile yet. I think that's probably a safe thing to say. Maybe necessarily not. Maybe that's how we should be. Yeah, I'm very interested to hear what comments we have on that in a moment as well. So I'm going to keep those results to one side. I'm just going to read a couple of audience things that have come through, as quite a few have come through in the last couple of minutes. Morton, hello Morton, says slide on maximum ROI, referring back to Julian's slides here. Couldn't help notice that conferences are not part of the multi-channel mix anymore, despite this likely taking a large chunk of marketing budget. Any reflections on that? Claudine says, what capabilities would you anticipate will be important for companies to be successful in pursuing this? I think we're actually going to talk about that a little bit later in this webinar, Claudine. Ashley says it would be interesting to know more about examples of the type of data and analytics to inform the various channel mix choices. I'm fairly sure we can cover that in a moment as well. Stuart, hello Stuart, says the lack of agreement with answer 2, that's on the previous poll, which was effectively the lack of data opportunity. That suggests a realistic appreciation that companies don't have analytics that they trust. Furthermore, business analysts have been in decline in numbers and seniority. Budgetary pressures seem to have squeezed out BI and allowed affiliate managers to take the lead in using outdated methods. So I'm not sure if our panel agree with that, with their own experiences, but that's an observation from Stuart Hadkins there. Thank you. A few other people, there's quite a few more comments just coming in about how we do indeed have a burning platform, but the question is, where do we jump to? The questions are narrow. The agility is what we require to succeed in a competitive environment now. So we've got a few things there for the audience, for the panelists to comment on, should they wish. So over to you, panel. Who wants to take one of those?
Yeah, well, I can comment on the. Sorry, Matthias, after you. Go ahead.
I'm actually surprised to hear the comment about companies actually reducing the use of data and analytics. From my experience, actually, I see more and more companies using actually the wealth of data, hiring themselves like more and more people, data scientists, like new profiles into the companies. So would be interested to hear actually the perspective from the other panelists on that.
Matthias, it's Paul. Yes, I think that I've certainly seen that as well. And my comment would be that we've certainly generated an awful lot of data. I think the phrase is created data lakes, but is it necessarily the data that we need? Is it aligned to our business objectives? Is it smart data? And I think we run the risk of wanting to gather as much as we possibly can, as opposed to gathering what we actually need.
Yeah,
I agree, Paul. I mean, what I see is a lot of data. I see companies with a lot of data. I see companies spend a huge amount of money on data. It's the analytics and the insight that data drives is sometimes variable. I've seen some really good examples and some companies that invest a lot in that. But that's the bit which I think probably we've still got some way to go. How do we harness that data and really turn it into valuable insight that changes behaviors within organizations and actually gives companies the confidence to actually experiment and do things differently. And I think one of the questions which came through kind of implied that because people maybe didn't have that level of confidence in the analytics, they're maybe not being as bold as they could be.
Yeah.
And another reason might be that I also heard the comment of one of the people participating in this webinar, that these, I would say, like data, like people more comfortable with data are very deep down in the organization, like at very junior levels. I think one critical difference that I see is like the value of data comes actually from the question that you ask. It's not about collecting as much data as possible, but you really need to have the strategic view. What do I actually want to achieve? What is the business problem that I'm trying to solve? And as I said earlier, like the burning platform could here be like, I have no idea how I should optimize my promotional mix in this example. Should I invest in congresses, conferences? Should I invest in more digital email campaigns? Should I have the traditional sales rep model? I think it's very important to be very clear upfront, like what is the question that I'm trying to address, and then see what is the question that we actually, what is the data that we actually need.
Yes, and I'd add to that point, Matthias.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry. Yeah, that's the point, Matthias. I think it's also dependent on where the analysts sit in the business. Do they sit in sort of like an analyst group or a department, or are they really embedded in the marketing teams, in the medical teams, in the cross-functional teams to help them, one, as you quite rightly say, in my opinion, ask the right question, and secondly, help them optimize when they start to produce content or mix their channels and give quick feedback. I think it really depends where the analysts sit in the business.
Mm-hmm. Just to say, the person who asked the original question, Stuart, he says that we have observed a decline in analytical capability, and I think the word capability there is the key, because there are plenty of dashboards, but they have legitimized less quality, dodgy analytics underneath the hood. So it's not necessarily that we're not doing more; it's that the quality is not simply there. A few other people writing in to say things that data is only helpful if it enables the business to make better and more rapid, ideally, decisions.
But I think actually you can make a tie back, Paul, to the previous poll on how long it takes to bring a marketing idea through, because it's not the amount of data. I think what the industry is facing is sort of analysis paralysis. And that is also why things take a long time to bring through an organization. And if you look at other industries, and I think perhaps one of the most famous people around this area is this Jeff Bezos of Amazon, who's famous for saying, you know, if you need to work with 80% of what you know. If you wait for the 90 or the 100, you're probably too late. Yeah, so there's this, so it's also accepting in our industry that we get enough to get going, but we don't sit and wait for the outer 20%. And I think that's what's really keeping us down.
Okay, that's a very good point there. Anybody else want to comment before we move on?
I was actually surprised with that chart about the 1 to 3 months in terms of the rate at which people can implement things.
Okay.
I think if you couple that with the discussion we've just had around analytics and the how good the analytics are, I see it taking people a long time to do the analytics. Maybe is not as good as it could be, and consequently, the rate at which people respond to market challenges is often 6 to 9 months.
Well, actually, you've made a very good point there that's echoed by one viewer who says that it's not necessarily the approval of the campaign. It might not take very long to get a campaign approved, but of course, there's a huge delay often in implementation for various different inertial reasons. Maybe there are fixed slots in the commercial organizations to actually run them. Perhaps if they're relying on Salesforce, that's obviously not typically a flexible organization. So I'm sure you have something to say on that, Julian.
Well, we have a client, top 5 client, global player, and their global procurement team came to us and they said, we really want to streamline the partners that we use, because at the moment, if a product manager wants to implement a different resourcing strategy, it will take them probably 1 to 3 months to get approval and budget, maybe longer. The procurement process can then take 3+ months. And then by the time you've actually built the resource and got it on the ground, it could be another 3 months. So from the moment that the marketing team came up with the idea to actually getting feet on the ground to actually make a difference can be up to a year, in which case sometimes the opportunities pass them by and then they just don't even do it. So
and Julian,
I think what that says is,
yeah, I wonder whether that's because, and again, based on my experience with a number of companies, we try and do it too big. I'm coming back to Christina's point of going with 80% and putting a small piece of content out there or testing with one channel. Because we have this perception that it takes so long, we try and do everything in, cram it in at the beginning and put a big load through the organization to get it signed off, rather than doing small pieces quickly, seeing what response we get back from the marketplace to that, and then add something else or tweak something else. Perhaps we try and put too much through, make it too heavy a load on the organization at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, because you kind of just defined agility there, haven't you?
Yeah, and I think it's linked to budget as well. I've got to spend the budget. If I don't spend it now, I may not have any later in the year, or somebody may take it off of me. I've got my planning cycles. If you work in a global team like I did, you've got to there's another element there of getting content out to the market. And therefore we work in those big lumps of either content to go with a cycle or according to a particular plan.
I think that's very much down to the nature of the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical companies, is that if you look at drug discovery, it's like, thousands of different candidates, and you sort of refine and refine and refine. And one day, eureka, you have the one candidate that you then bring to market. And in an agile world and in a world outside pharma, you do exactly the opposite. You bring out a lot of micro content, and then you see what moves the needle, and then you refine that. So it's a completely reversed way of working, and I think maybe just the fact that this has been a paradigm for so many decades in our industry, it makes it really difficult for people to apply different ways of working.
I have to say, there's no one's said that precisely in the way that you just did, Christina, but there's a lot of comments that echo a sense of sort of frustration. Rob Hulks, hello Rob, says, the organization is the issue. It's so difficult to change it. You must find a way to do so quickly. And later Rob's, it's the history of pharma engagement with customers, and it's been routinized. To disrupt that into a flexible model is a huge demand, and you have to have a lot of determination to try and get there. Jason, I'm going to read out a few more comments. Ashley says, many companies are able to provide data in the form of dashboards too frequently designed to support confirmation bias. That's one of my big issues as well, and directed, of course, by sales and marketing management. What appears to have declined is BI expertise to advise and inform marketing with independent insight. Morton, hello Morton again, says, on top of very long lead times for marketing, another issue is how the feedback loop then results into campaigns in order to adapt what works and what doesn't, and that is missing in so many cases. Ashley says, Julian's hit the nail on the head. Lack of agility and not being lean in many organizations. Compliance is a challenging issue that slows the adoption of lean and agile methods. Suzanne, I was going to come to. Hello, Suzanne, hope you're well. She says she's frustrated by being contacted with a huge mass of consultant companies and other solution providers. They all promise that they're the only key for the big data break, and sorting the wheat from the chaff is tricky. And I think she's keen that Christina is taking that particular point and responding to that one. So keen to hear what Christina says there. So I could read probably 5 or 6 more similar comments of that nature that have just come in the last couple of minutes. So there's a real sense that we want to do it, but sorting the wheat from the chaff, knowing what to focus on, is where we're breaking down. So does anybody wish to say anything about that? Christina, you were asked a question directly there.
Well, sorry, I dropped that part. Sorry, there was a question.
You dropped that part. Okay. Yeah. Suzanne was asking you, what do you do when you're faced effectively with the number of different people that are offering us a data solution, shall we say? How do you know what to focus on? How do you know what's important?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I wish I had like a very clear answer. I don't. I think overall it's about asking yourself what is critical for your company at this point in time. I mean, what are you looking for? What does good look like? And then reverse engineer that, and then go look for whoever can sort of help you on that road. So it's actually a reverse engineer model that seems to work the best, rather than looking at different vendors, at different times points prospectively. It usually doesn't work that way. And then, of course, at the end of the day, I have to say I appreciate the discussions I have with different vendors, because it often provides different perspectives. And again, I think that's another pharma pain point, is that we are a very closed club. It's like a closed party, and usually it's quite interesting to hear perspectives from others, and that I firmly appreciate. I rarely walk away from a conversation without having learned something.
Okay. Well, it turns out that we've actually got an audience question ready on this very point. What kind of agility are you most looking for in your organization? Hopefully you can see that in front of you right now. What is, again, I'm being a little bit mean here by forcing you to choose only one of these, so it forces you to choose which is the most important. Do you want to be able to scale resources easily, dynamically, according to variances in the campaign? Do you want to quickly test many hypotheses, get quick results on those hypotheses? Is it that you want to be able to try more ideas, say yes to more campaign possibilities to actually get more through approval, because it's being done in a more iterative fashion? Is it that your organization wants to become a true learning organization? We've talked about that briefly already, and that there's a recognition that the only way to know what works is to adopt this kind of methodology. Or finally, speaking honestly, are you really not sure yet? You're perhaps still deciding, maybe still new to this topic. So let's hear what the audience has to say. I've got about half of you voted. So 3 more seconds yet again. 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the answers. Okay, so well, we've got 3 winners each with almost a third of the vote. So want to be able to scale resources, that's right up there. Want to be able to test many hypotheses. Being able to say yes a lot of times is less important, but I guess that's not a million miles away from the answer before it. And want to be a true learning organization. Actually, I'm pleased to see personally that one is so high, as that's, as I mentioned earlier, my particular bugbear with the way in which we focus on these agile methods at the moment. So again, I'm actually quite interested to hear what those of our panelists might have answered to this question. Perhaps, Paul, we could start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think the first 2 are very similar. I think, again, it comes back to the point about getting analytics back and having that flexibility. I remember some time back, I think it's Coca-Cola that presented that we don't do campaigns anymore, we do a continuous engagement. And I think to be able to scale resources easily, test hypotheses, we've done these in several cases, the point of getting analytics back, but then acting upon them. I think all of these things we wish to do, and yet within the organizations, we find ourselves coming up against barriers that prevent us from doing that. I don't know how many people have been able to, yes, maybe able to get a yes to an idea, but been unable to unlock the budget to be able to achieve that, or there are other interested parties that sort of get in the way. But I would support those first. I think they're very close, and again, it comes back to how quickly you can get good analytics back and your mindset to actually act upon them.
Okay.
Yeah,
go for it.
I from the discussions I have across a multitude of clients, in a rapidly changing world where people are investing more and more in different ways of doing things, new channels, the question I keep on being asked is, I really need to know what is working, and I really need to know how I optimize the various different channels that I am using to engage my customers and patients. And so that for them is the holy grail, is to try and get to a situation where you almost have a different mix of engagement with every single customer, and that engagement with that customer is optimized for them in terms of how they behave and how they respond. So for me, the top one is something that I'm getting a lot back.
Okay, very interesting. Christina or Matthias, any comments on this? And because I know that we've got a couple of backup slides that might help provide some more color around this, so I might go to that in a moment. But before that, anything from you two?
I think like the answers from the audience actually very well resonate here. Like also these are the important factors from my point of view. One example that I'm always thinking of, like when I see some of my clients, how they do campaigns and how static everything is the presidential campaign of Barack Obama, and thinking of like the website that he launched actually for his presidential campaign was like he basically launched two websites in parallel, and half of the people saw the one version, half of the people the other version, and then every, like even in daily iterations, like the website changed completely, looking into what resonated more with people, and like a couple of weeks later the website looked completely different towards the initial one. I think that's a bit the spirit that we need to get to. Obviously there are constraints, kind of like compliance, approval, and that you have iterations there. But I think there you also need to be very solution oriented and just like get the right person on the team in a room and have them focused on a priority together. And then it shouldn't take weeks to get like all these approvals and iterations done, but it should be a matter of like a couple of days meeting and you're good to go.
Yeah, I'd agree, Matthias, and I and my colleagues have done similar things in the past, and certainly have accelerated in that agile way, looking at feedback. However, it tends to be for fairly short durations, for sprints, if you want to use that word. But the challenge is how do you, and people say, great, we've done that, we've moved it very quickly, we've got very quick feedback, and we've adjusted our campaigns. Oof, that was hard work. Now I'm going to go back to doing things the way that we used to. It's how do you then embed that consistently throughout the organization, so it's not just short bursts just to get something done because somebody may have put a very tight deadline in there, but it becomes a natural way of working throughout the organization.
I think I have a suggestion to that, because it's true that it can be seen as cumbersome if it's not thought about upfront. So the way the world of digital marketing outside of pharma works is that you would actually start by creating maybe 60 different campaigns, micro content campaigns, very, very basic, very cheap, nothing fancy. And then you bring that out, and then you split test, and then as I said, you pick the winners, and then you refine those further and further until you end up with maybe 2 hero campaigns. Of course, it's a bit more cumbersome going through a sales force, but I think if and that's also back to the compliance part and the approval, if you actually start with a much broader base and you get the approval for that, and then you run, so you've made the roadmap up front of how you're going to do it. It's not more cumbersome to be honest, because the way pharma normally sort of markets is that you do a lot of lead-in market research, etc. So it's not like it's not being tested. The problem is it's usually tested in a very artificial environment where you gather a bunch of customers in a room and they will tell you how they behave, but in reality we all know that people behave more emotionally than they would like to think. So what we're doing at least in ALK is that we are really adapting that way of working also in our more sort of classic pharma campaigns, and it certainly can be done. And I don't even think it's more work. It's just different. It's a different way of planning.
I think another problem to it is that most of the times that companies do it, it's kind of like on top of a day job, and that's why it's perceived as very cumbersome. But it needs to be clear, it needs to be a priority, and some other things need to be deprioritized. It's like there's lots and lots of activities where if you take a look at it from an external point, or if you just look at it objectively, that don't really move the needle, and where you say, well, I can just let go of these activities. No one is going to die because of that, and it will not really hurt my business. It will continue running. I now free up all the time that I have to focus on some of these priorities. It's a lot about prioritization, I think.
Yeah, and
you have a very good point there. Sorry, go on.
So
back to you.
Yeah, so an enemy, of course, is also that so I agree fully. It's the fact that it's on top of everything else, but I think it's also a matter of sort of this risk averseness that we have in the industry. So people really do not want to bring out a lot of campaigns, and then a lot of them don't fly, because the immediate question would be, why, what did you do wrong? But the Bobby McFerrin song, "Don't Worry, Be Happy." I think a very famous tech person once said, "Don't worry, be crappy." So there's sort of this notion that you have to accept that not everything will be good from the get-go, but at the end of the day, our customers will vote with their feet, and we really cannot predict what they're going to respond to. I think that's proven many times over.
And that's realistic, is it, Christina, in our product safe pharma environment where we have to be focused on safety?
I didn't mean safety. No. I didn't mean in terms of safety. I mean in terms of campaigns and selling material, etc. Yeah. Yeah,
there's a grey line there, though, I think. Anyway, sorry. Was it Paul or Julian who was saying something there?
Julian, I just building on one of Paul's points. I mean, we've deployed for customers these patient service teams. They're non-promotional. They're all about the patient, and they're all about providing a service to healthcare practitioners. And actually, they have a different campaign every month, and that's really challenged the marketing teams to think about this whole way of deploying resource and building campaigns in a different way, because you're having to be really agile. The advantage is you've got 12 plus campaigns a year. The materials really resonate with customers, and actually access with customers is in the high 90s. So I think where you do get it right, it can make quite a dramatic difference where you get the agility piece right.
Okay. The conversation has moved towards these kind of barriers and things that are actually stopping us progressing. So once again, I have something conveniently prepared for our audience. What do you guys think are the greatest barriers towards actually getting towards a more agile and flexible style of campaign planning and execution? I don't have, unfortunately, the one option that we've just discussed, which was the ability to do it on top of your additional tasks. But I do have 5 more. Lack of senior level buy-in and support, entrenched mindsets and culture, no sense of a burning platform. That's obviously something we talked about at the very beginning. Compliance and regulatory concerns are paramount and effectively prevent a lot of this activity from being as fluid as we might like. Short-term revenue goals, the learning actually comes second. And then finally, competencies within the organization. We don't actually know how, so that's more of a skill-based rather than an attitude-based issue that we have there. So let me hold that open for another few seconds. I can see, again, about half of you have voted, clearly the alert half. So let's hold that open. 3, 2, 1, here we go. Right. Okay, so it's not senior level buy-in. It's funny because I did run a session on this similar topic about a year ago, and that was far higher at that time, so that seems to have changed. Entrenched mindsets and culture, however, so it's not necessarily our senior managers, it's our middle managers maybe that don't have this sense of change, that find that they can operate comfortably where they are at the moment. Just over a quarter saying compliance and regulatory, and then significant minorities on both of the last 2 options. Short-term revenue goals, learning comes second, and finally competencies. We don't know how to do it. So I'd actually quite like to come to Matthias, because Matthias, I'd be very interested to hear you comment on this, but also bring in any examples or ideas you have from other industries outside of ours as to how we can overcome some of these barriers.
Absolutely. I think what we see here, like when I look for other industries, first I thought, like, as probably many people think, pharma is unique, it's specific. We have all the regulatory constraints that many other industries are not facing. In fact, when I did a little bit of research before, it's actually not that unique. If you look at the financial industry, there's a lot of banking regulation there. If you look at, I don't know, aviation, you want to make sure that when you get on your next flight that the flight is safe, or even tech companies nowadays that we describe as very agile, they also face a lot of regulation with like the data privacy laws, etc. So I think that actually pharma is not that unique in the sense that it has to abide to very tight regulation. Now, the unfortunate answer is there is no single silver bullet that helps companies to be very agile. And in fact, it's actually a combination of several factors. Like we heard a couple of things. Like one of them is really around the strategy of a company, that you have the senior leadership buy-in, but that it's also very important that you have the willingness to reallocate resources where opportunities arise, that it doesn't take months or even years to get the budget for something, but that you're able to free up a budget and reallocate a budget to something that is working better. That's one of the things. Other things is also the constantly looking out for new opportunities and seizing them. Like one example that's often discussed in the media is like Google, that at least for a long time and still a bit now had like the philosophy or the rule that employees got to spend 20% of their time on whatever they thought would add most value or most value to Google. I think that's one of the principles that really shows, encourages employees and also empowers them. I think these are some of the ingredients, but strategy is not enough. I think it's also the enablers, like a lot of the stuff that we discussed can actually be facilitated by technology, that you actually are able to provide tools to abbreviate certain things, that you can actually go much faster. I think there's lots of elements in here, like flat hierarchies in organizations, that you empower your employees, that it doesn't take forever, that not your manager and your manager's manager all need to approve something, but that they actually trust you in coming up with something new and great, and give you the response, not only the responsibility but also the freedom to operate. I think the sad thing is there's not a silver single bullet that will help you to do it, but that is a combination of several aspects that need to be addressed for it to be truly sustainable.
Thank you, Matthias, and I think that was a very nice way of summing up some of the things that we have to do. One eye on the clock, and I can see that we've only got a minute or two left. I'd quite like for Julian to have a final word, since, as I said at the beginning, Ashfield was the inspiration behind putting today's session together. Is there anything that you would wish for our audience to leave with in terms of an understanding or a further action?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's been a really, really good discussion. I think that there are obviously very different views across different sectors and different companies. I think the challenge for companies is, how do you get this entrepreneurial spirit out there and challenge some of the existing paradigms? And how do you actually recognize how agile you are? And what benchmarks and behaviors can you use to actually help you recognize, how quickly and how flexible you are responding to different market stimuli. So I think the whole multi-channel piece is really growing at a pace. And I think the data and analytics, some of the stuff that Matthias was talking about, is really starting to enable people to make better, more profound decisions, and to become more agile and flexible. So I would encourage people to look at that paradigm and look at how they can use those levers to make their organizations sort of quicker and speedier to move forward.
Thank you, Julian. And you make a very important point there, because there's one question which I never really had a chance to get to, which was, indeed, what are we using for our metrics? How are we actually benchmarking? And what I thought I would do, since there's still almost as many people on the line as actually started, is we're not going to have time to talk about the results here, but maybe just throw you one final question as we're going out, as the data might be interesting to us all. What can you use for benchmark behaviors and outcomes which really demonstrate agility? It's all about revenue and ROI. We measure how much we've spent operationally. We're measuring learning that is transferred to the next iteration and campaign. We're measuring the number of new tests and ideas and campaigns that we can actually work on over the course of a set period of time. So what for you, again, I'm being a bit mean and making you choose any one, what for you is actually driving and actually focusing in terms of metrics and analytics that you're using? And of course, if you vote for something else, then please do write what else is missing into the questions box, so that we're aware of that. Okay, I can see that roughly, again, the same half of you, I imagine, have voted yet again. Hold that open for 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you, everybody. Let's just have a look at those results as we finish. So clearly, it's about learning. So that's very nice to see. And yeah, sorry, go on.
Thanks, Paul. I'm pleased.
To say something. Yeah,
it's Paul. I'm pleased to see that. I agree with that. Learning that's transferred to the next iteration campaign. I think absolutely the case.
Okay. Right. Well, we've run out of time, I'm afraid. And the only thing really left to say is a huge thank you to each of the people that you saw in front of you there. If you look at your screen now, you'll see 2 events mentioned. I know that you're aware of these already, as you will have been made aware when you signed up for this webinar. Some of the people that you've met here today and heard from will be at one of these 2 events. I certainly know that there are a few familiar faces that you'll see. So if you are interested in carrying on this conversation, then this is a good place to do it. So do please take a look at those things. And of course, we have to reward you for getting this far into the conversation. And so if you indeed have done, then there's an additional €200 or $200 discount that you can get for a ticket to either one of those events. Just type in webinar 200 and the URLs are on this page as well. So huge thank you to our 4 panelists who've given up their time, energy and insights to share with us today. I'm going to hold this webinar open for another minute or 2, because I would really like, in the same vein as we've just been talking about in terms of learning and feedback, I'd love to hear from you guys as to what you thought and what we could do next in the next iteration, shall we say. So please do let us know. And we're really keen to hear your comments before you exit. Once again, to Christina, Julian, Matthias and Paul, absolutely fantastic having you on board here and for sharing so much with us. I'm confident that many of us will progress more confidently and of course with greater attention to customer needs going forward. So thank you so much for that. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and no doubt we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.